Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Unraveling Politics, a weekly political analysis show. Well, as usual, there's a lot to cover. We're going to cover quickly the war that has broken out in the Middle East. Will we get involved, and how could this have happened? Also, we will cover the end to Elon Musk and Donald Trump's feud, the riots that broke out in LA the week before last, the president's reaction, as well as my own reaction, and some of the tax cutting news. I know this is like the seventh week in a row that I'm talking about the tax cuts, but it's the only legislation that is moving through Congress. They're not doing much else. All right, so late Thursday night on June the 12th, Israel launched several attacks on Iran, targeting the nuclear program that they have been building for decades. I don't have the time to explain how this conflict between Israel and Iran built up, or about Iran's hostility to the U.S. That's a story for another time. But it appears that residential buildings were hit in the initial blast, and they definitely have been hit in the time since then. Who knows if this was on purpose? I assume not. Israel probably doesn't really care. They probably fire the missiles, and if some of them hit, missiles are obviously not perfect. There's environmental conditions and things like that, but they hit some residential buildings, and I think it was no skin off their nose if some buildings were hit or not. As for us Americans, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, clearly stated that that Israel's actions was unilateral. I always have found this hard to believe. Israel's like the 51st state. They're super close to us Americans, and I find it hard to believe Israel would act so harshly without at least informing American allies. Then Trump told the Wall Street Journal that the U.S. was aware of the attack, confirming my suspicions. We did know about it. Not only did we know about it, but we were involved in the details of the attack. According to an official, President Trump even vetoed a plan to assassinate the Iranian supreme leader, which would be like if a country assassinated the prime minister or president of a Western country. It's a big deal. And then Trump denied it. He's like, no, I had no involvement in that, which is quite interesting because his whole presidency has been about escalation. The tariffs and invading Canada and Greenland and Panama. So it's interesting that this is the one thing he does not want to escalate. The timing is convenient because on April 12th, President Trump set a 60-day deadline for Iran to agree to a new nuclear deal, which lapsed on June the 11th. This was just before the attacks. And this makes me think that we were involved. In fact, not only were we involved, that we probably suggested it. And President Trump stated, Iran must take a deal before there is nothing left and save what was once known as the Iranian Empire. So, yeah, I think this pretty much confirms, all but confirms, that we were actually involved. In response, the week leading up to the attack, global oil prices were slowly rising from $65 a barrel to more than $75 a barrel. And as of this recording, it is hovering at about $75 a barrel. That's exactly where we're at. U.S. oil's at $74. They have declined slightly since the initial shock. I believe we peaked, I can check right as I'm recording this, we peaked at $76 a barrel. And the reason why I mention this is because this is coming at a time when Americans are due to hit the road for summer vacation, and this will be a price shock at the pump. Now, it's not going to be a big one. It might be 10 to 20 cents a gallon, as opposed to when Russia invaded Ukraine. That was like a 50-cent a gallon price jump, and that was in the spring, and this is in summer. And from what I understand, gas demand is stronger in summer, but the supply is weaker in winter. And I imagine this is not the end. This is going to be a long war, I assume, especially unless Iran capitulates quickly. Israel definitely will not. And they've been trading weapons by trading, I mean, exploding them in the 4 days since the war began. And I would not rule out American involvement at this point. President Trump doesn't want American involvement, but I would not rule it out. Troop deployment is very unlikely, but American involvement with intelligence, weapons trading, and more is likely on the table, and I would say it has already happened. So what do I think about this? Well, of course, I feel the same human angst that we all feel about war hurting the innocent. I feel that just as much as everyone else does. And at the same time, though, I have no interest in involving the U.S. in this fight on any side. One of the benefits of having strong borders is that we don't have to worry about what's going on in other countries. I believe that supporting Israel has been a huge mistake. And if anyone out there doesn't agree with me, please, in the comments below, please tell me why. I think this has been a huge mistake. They've been dragging us into conflicts that are not our problem for the last 2 decades or more. Speaking of things that are not our problem, according to the Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz, he said the goal of Israel is now regime change in Iran, which basically means overthrowing the government. And Netanyahu has called for Iranian citizens to rebel against the government, which is insane. Imagine somebody telling the U.S., like Canada, saying that Americans need to rise up and overthrow the government. Like, that's insane. And I'm completely opposed to this for the same reason that in Iraq we overthrew the government there 2 decades ago, and chaos ensued, and it really hasn't gotten any better since. The difference is, it seems to be that an invasion of Iran would be impossible, because for the same reason an invasion of Afghanistan was not a good idea, because of the size and the terrain of the country. So it would have to come from inside, with help from the outside. But this would likely lead to a civil war and a collapse of the country, which nobody wants. This is just speculation on my part, so if you're confused, to be clear, I'm not an expert on the situation, please look into it more. But in Iran, I highly doubt we will see regime change, internally or externally. So Trump is denying he ever vetoed it. I told you this. He's trying to avoid escalation. If your head is spinning, don't worry. How does this affect you? Well, other than the turmoil in the oil and gas markets, which will increase the price of gas and electricity, I'm not entirely sure. If I had to guess, the president will now have to split his time between the riots in California, which I'll get to later, the tax cuts, which I'll talk about later, and thankfully, I don't have a lot to say about that, and now this. Next, kind of following up what we talked about last episode, it appears that President Trump and Elon Musk, their feud is basically over. And it ended basically as soon as I clicked upload on that episode. His comments about the tax-cutting bill, though, that it was an abomination, I imagine will resonate for the foreseeable future among House Republicans and Senate Republicans. But that seems like a million years ago now that this war has broken out. As for once the riots began, which I'm going to start talking about soon, Fox News noted that Elon Musk extended an olive branch, and he reposted one of J.D. Vance's tweets on Twitter about it. And this came after Trump said that Elon Musk has totally lost it. And I imagine this will not be the last we hear about this argument. Moving on to the riots, I've referred to this a lot, and I'm sorry I did not mention it last week. I was aware that they were happening. It was impossible not to know, but it was such a rapidly changing situation, and I wanted to wait and learn more about it before providing my comments. If you're unaware, the anti-deportation protests turned into riots in the LA area late week before last, and I believe it was on Saturday. This happened 5 years ago during the pandemic, the George Floyd, the Summer of Love version 3.0, and that burned down our cities. Let me explain to you as I understand it. Protests eventually turned to riots. At first, it started when a couple dozen illegal immigrants were detained by ICE. This was very late the week before last, and many incidents were violent, which resulted in attacks on police, burning cars, and dozens from San Francisco and Los Angeles have been arrested. President Trump on Saturday the 7th of June deployed hundreds of National Guard troops for 60 days. So that's basically for the rest of the summer. And LA is going to be monitored until then. President Trump used an emergency law where he used a clause that would allow him to do this if a rebellion against the United States is underway. And this is absolutely happening, I agree. Immigration law cannot be enforced, so that is a rebellion. Some, like Andrew Cuomo, who is running for New York City mayor, believe that this will be used in New York, and I agree. If riots break out in New York, I believe that's going to happen. The same is going to happen as well as other cities like Chicago, Washington, Seattle, Baltimore, and Philadelphia. I think the signs are already there, and it's only a matter of time. California Governor Gavin Newsom has threatened to withhold federal taxes to the government, which I believe the last time this happened was during the Civil War. And if I was president, I would consider this to be secession. California has sued the federal government, claiming what is happening is not a rebellion and that the National Guard was deployed without its consent. The federal court has ruled the National Guard troops can stay until Tuesday, which is tomorrow. For now, California National Guard troops will remain under the control of the federal government. So this is the classic states versus federal government case. This is something our founders talked about. They were concerned about centuries ago. And I believe President Trump is in the right here. He was enforcing federal law, the law that Congress approved and that states have no right to interfere with. There's something in the Constitution called the Supremacy Clause, which states that if there's a conflicting law from the states and federal government, the federal government law is supreme. And this needs to stop. These riots need to stop. We cannot have this happen anymore. And I cannot express just how insulting it is to have Mexican flags flown in our streets. And I think if Republicans were worth their weight in Congress, they would drop these tax-cutting measures, waste of our time and money, and start reforming our immigration system. First order of business is we should close all legal and illegal immigration from the third world. I do not care. We cannot take this anymore. We should not be accepting refugees, legally or otherwise, from Latin America, the Caribbean, Africa, the Middle East, or Asia, except for Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea. People have been abusing our immigration system, and many of these people who are rioting are descendants of immigrants from the third world. And then they have the entitlement to riot in our streets. We are out of space, we are out of time, and we are out of energy. We cannot do this anymore. We should not hand out, for any reasons, visas to people from the regions I outlined. And I'm sorry if you don't like this, but this is the truth. As Joe Scarborough said about Joe Biden and his help, I'm going to lay down the truth. This is because people have a tendency to overstay their visas. I'll get to that in just a moment. We are a country. We are not an international homeless camp. According to DHS, the third world has very high rates of people who overstay their visas. 51% of people from Chad overstay their visas. 24% of people from Haiti overstay their visas. 21% of Venezuelans overstay their visas. 36% of Somalians overstay their visas. Imagine if you hired somebody and 21% of the time they screwed you over, or 36% of the time, or 51% of the time. Citizens from the countries that are not the third world, like France, the United Kingdom, Germany, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, they do not overstay their visas. They almost never do. It's about 1%. And I don't blame them. These people who overstay their visas, they want to stay in the U.S. because we are much better than Chad, Haiti, Venezuela, and Somalia. If you don't already know, I'm very right-wing on immigration. It's probably the most right-wing thing I'm on. If I was in charge, we would have a border wall on the southern border with 24/7 monitoring. We would be shutting down our visa system to the third world, as I outlined, and we would also be sending illegal immigrants to Guantanamo Bay and then deporting them to their native country. And if their native country refused to take them back, we would have to consider sanctions on them. Not tariffs, sanctions. It doesn't seem that this situation is going to calm down. I am concerned about a summer of riots. And so is the administration. Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, has sent 700 active duty Marines. And apparently we now have more Marines in California than we do in Iraq and in Syria. Politically, people do not like riots. This has a chance to help the Trump administration as long as it doesn't come off as draconian or dictatorial. I am fully behind the administration on this. Like I said, President Trump has a clear and powerful mandate from the electorate last November to implement what he has called the largest mass deportation effort in American history. It was clear that that was his goal. Out of all of his policies, this was one of the clearest. Meanwhile, Democrats have done everything they can to stop the president from enforcing the law. At a press conference, Senator Alex Padilla, a Democrat from California, lunged at Kristi Noem, the Homeland Security Secretary. He was not wearing his Senate pin or identifying himself as a U.S. Senator until he started lunging at her. So it was not clear until he started to attack her, what looked like he was going to attack her. He was like, oh no, I'm a senator. Like, no, that should have been done before he even entered the room. And after leaving the room, he was released. Meanwhile, Gavin Newsom, who I call Gavin Newscum, is clearly positioning himself to run for president. He gave a primetime address Tuesday night last week titled Democracy is at a Crossroads. And Newscum stated, look, this isn't about the protests here in Los Angeles. When Donald Trump sought blanket authority to commandeer the National Guard, he made it clear that that order applied to every state in this nation. This is about all of us. This is about you. California may be the first, but it will certainly not end here. Other states are next. Democracy is next. Democracy is under assault right before our eyes. This moment we have feared has arrived. He's taking a wrecking ball to our founding fathers' historic project. 3 co-equal branches of independent government. There are no longer checks and balances. Congress is nowhere to be found. Speaker Johnson has completely abdicated that responsibility. The rule of law has increasingly given the way to the rule of the Don." End quote. I can't explain it, but he's clearly positioning himself to lead the party in 2028. And I hope not. I will oppose his candidacy, and both in the primary and in the general election, because he's done a terrible job as California's governor. All you need to go is go to San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, and Sacramento, and you'll see the crime, the homelessness, the poverty that is rampant on the streets. Do you want that in the rest of the country? No way. And before you say it was there before Newsom was there, it has gotten worse, and he has not done anything to make it better in his 6 years on the job. Anyway, in other news, there's the tax cuts. As I told you last week, the tax cutting measure is moving its way through Congress. Senate Republicans will almost certainly make changes to the bill. And I noticed in The Hill, which is a news outlet, that $1.5 trillion in tax cuts are slated to expire in 2028. This is something I said last week. According to the House Freedom Caucus Chairman Andy Harris, quote, "It means it's going to be an issue in the next presidential race," end quote. And he's clearly right. These tax cuts will drop off at the end of 2028, so this is a tax scam. Then Congress all over again will need to wrangle over these tax cuts once more in 3 years' time. This is a scam. It's a scam that they are trying to use to lower the cost of the bill right now, so that when we get to the end of the road, they're going to say, we need to extend these again, otherwise taxes are going to go up. But people like me are going to say, this was supposed to be temporary. There is an argument for these tax cuts that it will spur economic growth. If you cut taxes, then the economy will grow faster with the extra spending power of consumers and wealthy people. This is part of the same old failed Reagan policies that didn't work then and they don't work now. The Federal Reserve states that as of right now, we are projected to have 1.8% growth over the long run, which is really not that strong. And with the tax cuts, that will increase by 0.03% to 0.06%. So rounding up, it will increase the size of our economy by 0.1% while also ballooning the deficit. And just as a reminder, the Senate will be on recess soon, and the 4th of July deadline is coming up fast. June 27th is the last day for the Senate to pass the bill, and the House rules require a bill to be brought to the floor at least 3 days before voting on it. This means the latest the Senate could pass the bill and for the House to vote on it would be June the 24th, and that's just 8 days away. You might wonder, is this 3-day deadline flexible? Yes, it is. Speaker Johnson could, in theory, violate his own rules that he established and agreed to, and bring up the bill to vote sooner, but doing so would risk his own job. And it takes just one Republican and 8 co-sponsors, who are also Republicans, to join the large minority of Democrats to bring him down. That's according to House rules. I think this is a possibility. If you remember in our very, very first episode, all the way back in May of 2024, I said the coalition of chaos is not going to last very long. And it's lasted longer than I thought it would, but I still believe it's going to come down. And I think this is a possibility, but I'm not sure Republicans are going to do it at the moment because there are no viable options to replace Johnson. And until one emerges, I don't see that happening. Alrighty, that is all I have for you this week. Thank you for listening, and you will hear from me next week. And in the coming weeks, I have a surprising announcement. I'll be making that towards the end of July. So please stick around, and you will hear from me about that. Have a good one. Bye-bye.